Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Letting Go of Her podcast. Um, I want to talk about this book that I just recently finished reading. I think it came up like a random suggestion that I like found on Pinterest or something. I do, unfortunately, like to spend some time on Pinterest, just like scrolling through like outfit ideas or easy recipes or whatever. And from time to time, like random books will pop up. Um, and what I've been doing lately is I will go on the Libby app. If anyone has a library card, you can download the Libby app and search for books and if your library has that book available, then you can rent it or loan it um on the Libby app, and then it'll transfer to your Kindle. And it's great. I love it because it's probably saved me a lot of money, even though I still obsessively buy books when I have a list and a long shelf of books that I haven't read. But so when I see these books that seem interesting on Pinterest, I will go on Libby and see if my library actually carries it. And if it does, then I'll put on hold or read it or whatever it is. And if it doesn't, then I'll go on Amazon and I will just add it to my cart and save it for later so that like I can remember what books I wanted to read. And I am a very big like judge a book by its cover and by its title really. If the title like strikes me as something interesting, I will look into it. And this book specifically, I don't even remember how long ago it was that I came across it because sometimes when you find books, there is like a couple weeks like wait depending on how many actual copies they have at the library and how many people want to read it. So I don't remember when I had requested, but it came up and I was like, okay, cool. I just finished, I just finished reading all of Twilight or the Twilight series. Um, and my brain was kind of like it felt a little dumb, you know? And I was like, let me, read something intellectual now. So the book is called Bad Therapy: Why Kids Aren't Growing Up Today. And I don't know the name of the author at the top of my head, but I'll look it up. Um, and it's it this person, she is a journalist, and she just went around asking a bunch of psychologists and a bunch of different people about their opinions on therapy. And it was actually quite interesting. I don't really know what I expected out of this book, but some of the things that they said were very, very intriguing and honestly like makes me want to quit therapy. So I first did therapy back when I was 23 years old, and I went through 3 different therapists, and none of them seemed to be the right fit for me. One of them was too sympathetic, one of them wasn't sympathetic at all. The other one, just I just didn't vibe with them. And honestly, what it was I don't think that I was ready to accept what therapy actually was. At the time, I thought, like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy, and this person is going to give me all of the answers to all of my problems, and we're going to fix them, and life's going to be beautiful and grand, right? That's not necessarily how therapy works. It's more about self reflection and you know, uh, self intellectualizing. Is that a word? I don't know. Um, but just like, you know, it's yeah, self reflection. So like you go and you talk through different things, and then you're like, oh, now I get it, or oh, it was my fault, or or whatever it might be, right? I don't think at the time I was mature enough or ready enough to realize that um, most of my issues and my problems were because of me, right? Like I simply wanted to blame it on everyone else. But then I went back to therapy um, in 2022. And by the time I had gone to therapy, my therapist was like, wow, you've done a lot of like work on yourself and stuff. And we kind of went over like a few different things, and she did give me a lot of very helpful pointers when it came in terms of my general anxiety disorder as well as my social anxiety disorder. And we would talk about why I became the way that I did, and blamed it on my past and my upbringing and whatnot. And then I was discharged in June of 2023. And then this was when I started getting panic attacks, and my anxiety was at its worst. And my husband suggested that I go back to therapy, like, to just kind of text my therapist and be like, hey, you know what, this is going on. And I didn't want to, because I was like, no, that means that I have failed. That means that, she didn't do a good job, like, and finally it was around last year during Christmas that it was like really really bad. And so I had texted her and I was like, hey, you know what, my anxiety is it's absolute worst right now. Like, I really think that I need to come back to therapy. And so she was like, okay. And she didn't have anything available for like another 4 to 5 weeks, I think it was. um and I was like, okay, you know what, it's fine. Like, I'll take it. At least, I made the call. And so I have been back in therapy since January of this year. So I guess another year now, right? Or almost another year. Um, but for the last couple of months, I have been feeling that um, I don't need therapy anymore. And for me, it's been kind of convicting. I feel that a lot of the times it just feels like a gossip session. Kind of like, oh, this happened and she said this and they did that, right? So like I leave feeling extremely convicted, like, oh, like, why would I talk about this person, or why would I say those things, right? um and then also, some of my sessions were becoming extremely triggering, like things that she would say, that would just cause me more anxiety. So it wasn't like helpful at all. And there were like times where I would get anxiety about going to therapy, and I'm like, this really isn't how it should be. And then there were times where it just felt very repetitive. It felt like, why do we keep talking about these things? Like, why do we keep bringing this up? Like, I've personally have already moved on, and sure, she can continue to make the connections as to why I feel a certain way. It's because of this or because of that, but I've already moved past that, right? So like, stop telling me that I am the way that I am because of my past, and tell me like how to move forward, right? um and so, for like a few months now, and I've been, talking to a few friends, or yeah, like a few friends that I trust about it, and telling them like, you know what, this is how I'm feeling about therapy, and like, I just don't feel that it's being very useful to me anymore. Like, yeah, it served its purpose, it's did its job, but now I feel that, um, like, that I don't need it anymore. But part of me was also is afraid of letting go of my therapist, because, you know once I was discharged, then this is when my panic attacks started happening. And so I was like, what if it was because I didn't have anyone to talk to, or anyone to like vent to, right? So a little part of me, is still scared, because I'm like, if I let go of my therapist, like, is it going to get bad again? So this book, Bad Therapy, the reason why kids are not growing up today. Um, it was an extremely, extremely great book. Now, the author is not a psychiatrist, psychologist, anything like that. She's just a reporter. But she was trying to figure out why it is that nowadays so many teenagers, and even younger than that, have anxiety disorders, have depression, have all these different mental health issues, and they're all on medication. Um, and like, why is it that the mental health crisis has like skyrocketed in the last like decade or two? um and she goes through like, through like different phases and stuff, and saying how like parents nowadays, if their kid seems too distracted or too hyperactive or to this or to that, they send them straight to the doctor, which then sends them to a psychologist or whatever, and gives them a diagnosis, because it gives the parents some sort of comfort in knowing that there's something quote unquote wrong with their child. And it's not just their child being uncontrollable per se. And then from that point on, lots of parents are like, okay, well, let's medicate, right? And so they end up giving these young kids, these young teenagers, these young, teen adults, like all this medication, which then that hinders how their brains are actually going to develop, because your brain is still developing at that age, and so you're going to give it all these chemicals that are going to make it do all these different things, and so it ends up like hindering your brain development, which only at that point makes things a lot worse. And she was saying how nowadays when you ask all these teens, like, how are you, or how, what's going on, everyone's like, have so much anxiety. Oh, I'm feeling super depressed. Um, and she was saying how, nowadays, like, yes, they are, or we are breaking some sort of like mental health stigma, but like, have we broken it to the point where everything now needs a diagnosis, where everything now needs to be, said and seen and medicated at this point? And she, interviewed like some teenagers and stuff. And one interview that really stuck out to me was of this teenager, and she was saying how, one of her friends was really depressed and was inflicting in like self harm. And she was like, okay, how does that make you feel? And she was like, honestly, like, I don't know, like it makes me feel that like I should be doing something when I'm feeling sad also, right? So it kind of like made like a ripple effect, right? Like when one starts doing it, then like all the rest of the friends start doing it also. And then she was saying how, like, 90% of her friends are all on some sort of medication, like some sort of anxiety medication or depression medication, but that she wasn't. And the person like interviewing her was like, okay, and like, do they seem better since being on this medication? And she's like, honestly, no. If anything, they're you know they're acting worse. It's being worse. And it's funny because if you actually pay attention to like ads of like depression medication, it like says like, if you're like, one of the side effects could be like your depression worsening or getting suicidal thoughts and stuff, right? So it's like, if this is supposed to be helping me, why are some of the side effects it making me feel worse, right? um so it was just an extremely interesting read. And then she was saying how, like, when you go to a doctor, your doctor at that point, you go to a doctor because you're sick, gives you a diagnosis, and then gives you medication, and then you're on your way, right? But every time you end up getting sick, you keep going back to that doctor. So just because they handed you medication doesn't mean that they have discharged you as a patient and they're no longer going to see you. But as a therapist, once they give you a diagnosis, once you are discharged, like, that is it. They are done. They are no longer getting paid by you, right? So she was saying how, therapists like want to keep their patients, and that they tend to keep the patients that are the least sick, because they're the easier ones to manipulate, and they're the easier ones to, essentially just kind of keep charging. That they're not going to take someone who has an actual, real like mental health crisis, like schizophrenia, for example. They're not going to keep a patient like that, because that's harder work. But it's easier to keep someone who thinks that they have an anxiety disorder or who thinks they have depression, when really they're just dealing with the ups and downs of normal life, because it keeps their paycheck coming every month. And I remember reading that and I was like, it like, in my head I was like, is my therapist keeping me because she knows that it's a steady paycheck for her, right? Like, am I one of those that is not as sick as I think that I am? um and she just keeps bringing me back and like re-triggering me, just so that I keep thinking that I need her, right? And I didn't want to think this way, and I didn't want to think badly of my therapist, because, like I said, at some points she made really good points, and she really, slapped me in the face and was like, this is what's wrong, or it's your fault, or you're the one doing it to yourself, sort of deal. um but it just kind of made me think more about it, right? And I was like, oh. And I remember, telling my husband this, and my husband has been telling me for a long time to just break up with my therapist and quit therapy. But I was, kind of going over with him like what I was reading in this book, and he's just like, I could have told you this, right? um, so yeah, it's just, that's kind of where I was, and I had to kind of share this because I feel that for me, my fear of like quitting therapy comes from me thinking that I'm going to, continue with the really bad panic attacks and the really bad anxiety, right? Like I'm holding my therapist as like a sort of crutch, right? Um, but I, but I've been feeling just kind of extremely convicted of like, why am I relying on my therapist as much when really I should just be relying on Jesus? I had been talking to a friend about this, and I feel that I've been talking to her about this for a while or for a few times, right? About how I'm like, I need to quit therapy, right? But I just don't seem to have the guts to actually do it. And I remember she made a really good point. Because when I went to Hume Lake, right, the women's retreat that my church goes to every year, I had a horrible panic attack the moment that like I arrived, or the moment that we were all having dinner. And I just had really bad anxiety the whole time that I was there. And she was like, okay. She was like, what did you do at Hume Lake when you had your panic attack, when you had your really bad anxiety? She's like, you didn't have reception. You couldn't contact your therapist, right? Like you didn't have your safe stuff, right? Like you didn't have your phone, you couldn't call your husband, you couldn't, scroll on social media, like you couldn't do anything. She's like, you weren't around your safe people. She's like, what is it that you did in order to overcome your panic attack and your anxiety? And I was like, I just prayed. I'm like, I'd be walking around just praying. I'd be eating my dinner or my lunch or whatever and like having a smile on my face, but I would just be praying that the Lord take this like horrendous feeling that I was feeling away so that I would be able to feel him more. And that like really made me think, right, as to like how dependent have I become on my therapist, thinking that my therapist is going to solve all of my issues and all of my problems, when really there's only one person who can truly solve all of my issues and all of my problems. And that is someone who has given me his hand and been like, just hold it and I'll walk you through this, right? Um, but it's, it is hard because in my head also, I know that with his hand, I also did go through bad panic and bad anxiety, right? And he did see me through it, but it's still scary to think about like, oh, like even holding his hand, like I still went through this. So if I hold his hand, like am I going to go through it again, right? And it's a scary feeling. And I think that it's okay to admit to ourselves that like we're afraid, right? That we're afraid of what the Lord has in store for us. But I think that it's extremely important to remember that regardless of what it is that He does have in store for us, He is going to walk us through it and He's going to hold our hand the entire way. And because we have that, we shouldn't be afraid. I personally wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Jesus, because there is no way that I would have survived those horrible panic attacks and that horrible, horrible spout of anxiety, which from time to time I still have. Um, but I wouldn't have been able to survive without him. Like there's absolutely no way that I would still be here. There were many times where I was like, I can't do this. Like I can't handle this. There were many times where I wanted to just drive myself and admit myself because I'm like, I can't handle this. Something has to be horribly wrong. Like I can't continue feeling like this. Um, and all I ever did during those moments was just pray to the Lord. And I was like, Lord, I know that you can take this away, right? I know that you can take this away. And, you know, I truly hope that I haven't missed the mark. I truly hope that I haven't missed what the Lord was preparing me for and what the Lord was trying to teach me in this. He was teaching me to rely on Him more. He was teaching me to trust in Him more. But He was also teaching me that it's impossible to do life alone because for so long I was like, no, I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. Like, I've got this. I've got this on my own. But I don't. I can't do it on my own. I need Him, but also I need His people with me to be able to help me physically pull through out of this. And honestly, I would not have been able to get where I am today if he hadn't pushed me into having panic attacks. if he hadn't pushed me into worsening my anxiety, because I wasn't willing to just break down my walls. I wasn't willing to just bring them down and been like, "Hey," I wasn't willing to be vulnerable, and I wasn't willing to let people in. He had to make me break, and he had to put me at my extremely lowest point in order for me to finally reach out and be like, "I need help." Anxiety is a very selfish sin, um, because anxiety is thinking, like, if I think this, or if I think that, or if I do this, or if I do that, right? Like, you're preparing for every single sort of like worst case scenario because you want to be in control. And you're not putting trust in the Lord that He is in control, but you're also not putting trust in the Lord that He knows what is best for you. Being anxious and having that anxiety is thinking that you know what's best for you. And so you're trying to play God. You're trying to be God. You're trying to think of like, no, I'm gonna do this or handle it this way, or I'm not gonna go there because then this is gonna happen. And you start, getting your mumbo jumbo of like all these thoughts and all of these things because you're trying to be God. You're trying to be in control. And you're telling him like, no, you don't got this. I've got this. But really, do we ever do we ever really have it? I I don't want to think that I'm God. I don't want to think that I'm better than God. I don't I don't want to think that I can control things better. And I don't want to think that I know what's best for me better than what he thinks is best for me. I don't want to think that way anymore. He has seen me through all of this. He has seen me through the worst I've ever felt, because he just wanted to show me how much he loved me. And that's a little weird to think about, right? It's a little ironic to think about, like, wait, why would he put me through pain to show me that he loves me? It's like, because any other way, I never would have accepted his love for me. I had to be in pain in order to understand how much he loves me. And I don't think that's like a concept that I've truly ever really been able to grasp. Because, just growing up, I always thought that I was unlovable, right? That I always thought that I was just brought on this earth for no apparent reason. But God makes no mistakes, and He put me on this earth for a reason. But He also gave me my panic attacks and my anxiety to prove to me how much He loves me, because He walked me through them and He held my hand the entire time. And He said, I'm here with you and I'm going to feel your pain with you. What, like, what other kind of parent can do that, right? Like, sure, we see our children in pain, but we can't feel the pain that they're in. But God can. He can feel the pain that we're in, and He sympathizes with us and He walks us through it. And I don't think there's a greater love than that. My prayer for today is that the person who doesn't quite understand why God is putting them through a specific trial, that you know that He's doing it because He loves you. He loves you so much that He wants you to become like Christ. He loves you so much that He wants you to grow closer to Him. And sometimes we just have these sins, these sinful ways that we don't realize that we're doing, and we don't realize are taking us away from Him. So he's got to do what He's got to do in order to take that sin, for us to be able to open up our eyes and see what it is that we are doing wrong that's keeping us away from His love. For me, it was my anxiety and my wanting to be in control, my wanting to be God, right? He had to take that away so that I can learn to trust Him and so that I can learn to accept His love. And what a gracious God that is, that He's willing to do that for us. because he just loves us so much. I pray that that everyone listening can realize how much God loves you. He picked you. He knew you and said, "The world needs you." That's how much he loves you. That he decided to create you. He could have created anyone or anything else, but he decided, no, the world needs her or him. And that is a beautiful thing. Like, what a good and gracious Father it is that we have. Today, I am learning to let go of my need to control everything. Today, I am learning to let go of me thinking that I know better than what God has in store for me. Today, I'm learning to let go of my need to overthink, of my need of needing to know everything. But also, I'm learning to let go of me thinking that I am unlovable because the creator of the universe loves me, because I am his new creation.